A provost is the ceremonial head of many Scottish local authorities, and under the name prévôt was a governmental position of varying importance in Ancien Régime France history. As a secular title, praepositus is also very old, dating to the praepositus sacri cubiculi of the late Roman Empire, and the praepositus palatii of the Carolingian court. The title developed in France from where it found its way into Scots, where in Scotland it became the style of the principal magistrates of the royal burghs, and into England, where it is applied to certain officers charged with the maintenance of military discipline. A provost marshal is an officer of the army originally appointed when troops are on service abroad for the prompt repression of all offences. He may at any time arrest and detain for trial persons subject to military law committing offences, and may also carry into execution any punishments to be inflicted in pursuance of a court-martial. A provost sergeant is in charge of the garrison police or regimental police. The provost also refers to the military police in general. The British Army pronunciation is prévôt, though the U.S. Army pronunciation is provost as written. Scotland. Historically, the provost was the chief magistrate or convener of a Scottish borough council, the equivalent of a mayor in other parts of the English-speaking world. Previous to the enactment of the Town Councils Act 1900, various titles were used in different burghs, but the legislation standardized the name of the governing body as the provost, magistrates, and councillors of the borough. After the reorganization of local government in Scotland in 1975, the title of Lord Provost was reserved to Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow, while other district councils could choose the title to be used by the convener. In 1994, 22 councils had provosts. Similar provisions were included in the Local Government etc. Act 1994, which established unitary council areas in 1996. The area councils are allowed to adopt the title of provost for the convener of the council, as are the area committees of the council. Some community councils, which include former burghs, also used the style for their chairman. France. The word prévôt applied to a number of different persons in pre-revolutionary France. Following its historical meaning, the term referred to a seigneurial officer in charge of managing borough affairs and rural estates and, on a local level, customarily administered justice. Therefore, in Paris, for example, there existed both the Lord Provost of Paris, who presided at a lower royal court, as well as the very important and influential Provost of the Merchants, i.e., the Dean of the City Guilds, who headed traditionally the City Council and the city's merchant companies, thus being de facto a kind of feudal mayor. In addition to these two, there were provost marshals, aka provosts of the marshals of France, the provost of the royal residence, later aka the Lord High Provost of France, and the provost general, later aka the Lord High Provost of the Mint. Royal provosts, the most important and best-known provosts, as part of the king's personal aids administering the scattered parts of the royal domain, were the royal provosts. The regional title of those provosts varied widely from province to province for traditional reasons. Castellans in Normandy and Burgundy, and vicars in the south. These titles were retained from earlier times when formerly independent provinces were conquered and subsumed under the French crown. Royal provosts were created by the Capetian monarchy around the 11th century. Provosts replaced viscounts wherever a viscounty had not been made a fief, making it likely that the domainal provost position was fashioned after the corresponding ecclesiastical provost of cathedral chapters, a charge which was strongly developed in the same era. Royal provostships were double-faceted. provosts were initially entrusted with royal power and carried out the royal part of local administration, including the collection of the crown's domainal revenues and all taxes and duties owed to the king within a provostship's jurisdiction. Also, they were responsible for military defense such as raising local contingents for royal armies. Also, the provosts administered justice with very limited judicial powers. For instance, they never had any jurisdiction over noblemen or feudal tenants who instead fell under the jurisdiction of either a regional royal court or their respective lord's court, where they were tried before a jury of the peers, that is, the lord's other vassals. Provosts had no jurisdiction over purely rural areas, the pays, which instead fell to local lordship jurisdiction or lower royal courts. Basically, provost jurisdiction was restricted to minor and medium delinquency committed in towns under the control, but was often usurped by borough, city courts chaired by burgesses. Until the end of the old feudal regime, a number of military provost positions survived until being replaced by other judging charges in administering military justice. Since the 11th century, the provosts tended increasingly to make the positions hereditary and thus became more difficult to control. One of the king's great offices, the great seneschal, became the supervisor. In the 12th century, the office of provost was put up for bidding, and thereafter provosts were farmers of revenues. The provost thus received the speculative right to collect the king's seigneurial revenues within his provostship. This remained his primary role. Short-term appointments also helped stem the heritability of officers. Very early, however, certain provostships were bestowed on guard, i.e. on condition the provost regularly render accounts to the king for his collections. Farmed provostships were naturally a source of abuse and oppression. Naturally, too, the people were discontent. Joinville told of how under St. Louis the provostship of Paris became an accountable provostship. With the death of Louis XI, farmed provostships were still numerous and spurred a remonstrance from the States General in 1484. Charles VIII promised to abolish the office in 1493, but the office is mentioned in the Ordinance of 1498. They disappeared in the 16th century, by which time the provosts had become regular officials, their office, however, being purchasable. Further oversight and weakening of provostships occurred when, to monitor the performance and curtail abuses, the Crown established itinerant justices known as bailies to hear complaints against them. With the office of Great Seneschal vacant after 1191, the bailies became stationary and established themselves as powerful officials superior to provosts. A bailie's district is called a bailiary and included about half a dozen provostships. When previously impossible appeals of provost judgments were instituted by the Crown, the competence of appeal was given to the baillie. Moreover, in the 14th century, provosts no longer were in charge of collecting domainal revenues, except in farmed provostships, having instead yielded this responsibility to royal receivers. Raising local army contingents also passed to bailies. Provosts therefore retained the sole function of inferior judges over vassals with original jurisdiction concurrent with bailies over claims against noblemen and actions reserved for royal courts. This followed a precedent established in the chief feudal courts in the 13th and 14th centuries in which summary provostship suits were distinguished from solemn bailiary sessions. The provost as judge sat of single bench with sole judicial authority over his court. He was, however, required to seek the advice of legally qualified experts of his choosing, and, in so doing, was said to summon his council. In 1578, official magistrates were created, but were suppressed by the 1579 Ordinance of Blois. The office was restored in 1609 by simple decree of the King's Council, but it was opposed by the Parliament courts and seems to have been conferred in but few instances. Provost marshals. French provost marshals were non-judicial officers attached to the marshalry which under the old regime was vested with police authority. It would be replaced after the Revolution of 1789 by the newly created Gendarmerie Nationale. Originally, they were assigned to judge crimes committed by people in the army, but over the course of the 14th and 15th centuries, they gained the right to judge certain types of misdemeanors and felonies committed by the military and civilians alike. They became fixed with set areas of authority, and the offences falling within the jurisdiction came to be called provost crimes. Provost crimes included high violent crimes and crimes committed by repeat offenders, who were familiarly known as the gibier des prévots des maréchaux. They had military jurisdiction in regiments without military provost, and the rulings were not appealable. However, the provost was required to consult a certain number of ordinary judges or masters of law, as presidial judges had concurrent jurisdiction with provost marshals for non-military cases. The two vied openly to be vested. In fiction, in the Cadfael series of historical detective novels by Ellis Peters, taking place at 12th-century Shrewsbury, England, an important role is played by the town's provost, who in addition to this position is a prominent shoemaker. The provost plays an important role in William Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. He is promoted at the end of the play,